Earlier in CSS, we learned about the width and the height properties. Width allows us to set a specific width to an element. Sometimes we will run into an element that does not want to cooperate with us, and if we ever run into that, we use the max width or min width properties. Even if you run into an element that does cooperate with your width and you still want to specify a max or min width, that is allowed as well. What a max width is the maximum width. And the maximum width is the width of an element, and it will never ever for any reason be larger than that. And the minimum width is virtually the same thing. No matter how small you try to make it, it will always stay that minimum width. So let's look at this now. We have our properties, max-width and min-width. They both accept none, length, a percent, and inherit. None means there's no max width, and this actually isn't applicable for minimum width. Length is the maximum or minimum width in pixels, centimeters, etc. Percent is another way to specify the max or min width, and we can do that by setting max or min width to, for example, 40%. Usually if we have to set a max width, that means that we have leaking content from our element, in which case you might want to consider using overflow to hide or scroll the content. Now let's go over max height and min height. The exact same conditions from max and min width apply to max height and minimum height. The only difference is the property name. We use height instead of width, and we use max height to specify a maximum height of an element, and we use min height to specify a minimum height. In both cases of max height or min height, or max width or min width, they do not include extra padding, margin, or any borders that are added to the element. So an element width of 50 pixels but has 5 pixel padding all around it will actually be 60 pixels wide. We have a width 250 pixels, max width 250 pixels, and padding of 5 pixels. So our box down here should be, in theory, 250 pixels. We specified the max width to be 250, and it should not ever go larger than that, unless we add a padding, in which case the width is actually the inside there. You can't actually see the padding, but the 250 pixel width starts right at the left border of the blue highlighted section. So between our border and our blue part, that's 5 pixels, same with the top and the blue part, that's another 5 pixels. And the entire highlighted content here, that maximum part will be 250 pixels. The displayed example right here is a 260 pixel wide box, and that's because you have 5 pixels to the left and 5 pixels to the right of padding. Also note that there is a 1 pixel border around it, so the element in total would be 262 pixels. Now I hope I didn't overcomplicate that. I just wanted to let you know that padding, margin, and borders will add extra width to your elements, on top of a max width or a minimum width. Oh, and before we go on, I realized that we didn't go over max height or min height, so we're just going to go over this real quick. Same thing applies. It accepts none, length, a percent, or inherit. The only one we really need to know if we're going to specify a max height or a minimum height would be our length or a percent. So a length again would be your pixels, centimeters, etc. Or you can specify a percent. And again, with a minimum percent height, it might not work in all browsers, so you might want to use an exact measurement. For example, instead of 4%, we could write 400 pixels for a maximum height. Now this might not seem too useful. However, once you start adding a lot of different elements into other elements and creating a very large document object model, you're going to find that some elements are going to try to push other elements aside while still staying in line with each other, and that's going to expand the parent element, in which case your content's going to leak, or your element's going to expand past what you want it to, in which case we would use a max height and a max width, and that parent element will no longer expand.